Thank you. Can I just also thank Emily, and can I, given that NIESR is a organizer, take this opportunity to congratulate Jagjit on his honor in the recent birthday honors. I thought that was tremendously well deserved. What I'm going to do today is to talk a little bit about what role the government statistical service, broadly defined, and therefore ONS as part of that, should be doing both at a time of a pandemic and then in normal times afterwards. And the two are very much interlinked. Seems to me that as a government statistical service, we have a real job to do in order to measure the economy and measure society. Very broadly defined. That's incredibly broad conversation, because that just about covers everything that's going on in our world today. And we know that both of those change. They change at a time of a pandemic incredibly quickly. And therefore, it is absolutely critical that we are always, as government statisticians and government economists, in a state of permanent change, because our job is to reflect what's going on in society and in the economy. Mike, could I have the slides? If not,
Shaman, can you do that, please?
If not, I'll just push on, because what it is that we as statisticians have to do is, in one sentence, to provide trusted, accurate data to inform both government and citizens. And citizens is incredibly important. And if I go back over my career, for the first 35 years of my career, that reflected designing surveys, getting surveys done, designing censuses, and getting censuses done. That's what I, as an academic, did, and what we talked about as data. And yet in the last few years, we've been able to say, hold it, hold it, hold it, hold it. There are many more opportunities for us to use data, and there are many more opportunities for us to bring more than one data source to the party. So over the last pandemic, we have absolutely accelerated what was already the beginning of a trend. And that acceleration has been to really make the most of public data, of private data, and indeed of academic data. And it's great to see Paul Misen and John Gallagher on this call. So they're really bringing together data from many, many sources in order to address problems. And as Mike, as you said in your initial remarks, doing so as much as possible. We talk about doing it in real time. And that is so incredibly important. And I think the government statistical service as a whole should get a bit of a pat on the back, frankly, right across, for the work that's been done to deliver at pace so much information to inform data. Some of it, I know, going very quickly into government, others of it being part of, I think this country, for example, calculates GDP better than any other country in the world at the moment. And we should be proud of that. But it has been delivered at pace, and it has been delivered using a variety of data. So we have, yes, now really started to get a base of using administrative data in real time in an exciting way. Secondly, during the pandemic, we have used a wide range of radical data sources. Mike, you yourself has really been at the forefront of this, but we've been web scraping vacancy data from Adzuma. We've been using scanner data. We've been using telephony data for movement. We've been using financial transaction data to understand what the consumer is doing. We've been using GPS data to understand shipping movements. We're using road traffic cameras to understand mobility. I mean, I could go on and on and on. And you may say, great, the world now is administrative data, born digital data, and private sector data mixed with public sector data. I would argue, yes, but what the pandemic has also seen is that you absolutely do still need surveys. There are things you can only get from a survey, and some of the things that we've learned about vaccine hesitancy, some of the things we've learned about the wearing of face masks, some of the things we've learned about anxiety and mental well-being could only have been got through surveys. So my message is that as we move from the pandemic, first message, no going back. Second message, we must continue to build a partnership of public, private, academic data from a wide range of sources using still surveys. But when we do surveys, we should only use them to collect data that can't be collected from other sources. We should use census data 100%. We should use administrative data, and we should be searching tirelessly for the kinds of radical new, often born digital data that I've talked about. And critical to all this then, particularly as I've said, we only use surveys to collect data we can't collect anywhere else, is record linkage. Linkage of data is going to be absolutely critical. Particularly as we need to do this at pace, and I would argue we need to do things in an absolutely inclusive way, making sure every citizen in our country has a voice. And an example of that is the great work that people between ONS and BIES and DWP and MHCLG did to put the data together with stakeholders in civil society that enabled the Everyone In program at the beginning of the pandemic for the homelessness. And I was talking just yesterday about future work on the homeless. So record linking data, absolutely critical. Now, there are privacy worries we need to overcome, and that's why I'd argue we've moved into a world now where we absolutely have to use trusted research environments and absolutely have to make the most of, for example, the ONS Secure Research service, which enables access to data, but in an absolutely privacy constrained way, and to do so with really strong ethical wraparounds. And just an example of the sorts of things you do using linked data with ethics is the whole agenda that we've found around the impact of the virus on mortality in ethnic minority populations, where by linking death certification with census data and other data, we were able to show the real impact that was had. So what about the future? More of the same. I think leveling up has enormous opportunities. We really want to know what it is that is making different towns successful, and you can show, as we have done, that if you link data from a wide variety of sources at a flexibly low geography, then you can see, for example, that in the Northeast, fully 44% of towns have the challenging conjunction of low job density and high deprivation. 44% in the Northeast, less than 10% in the Southeast, the Southwest, and the East of England. So there are real issues there about job density. And Mike, I know that BIES is joining ONS, or ONS and is joining BIES, is perhaps the best way to say it, on the expeditionary force to Darlington. And I'm delighted that we've had our first appointment in Darlington, hopefully just starting to do something for the job market there in Teesside. And I think the whole government Places for Growth agenda is, I think, a measure of the need to push in this direction. But it will only work if it gets really strong, quick data linked together, combinations of public, private, and academic data, and that we work together to ensure that happens. And I'm delighted now to pass over to Patrick.
Thanks, Ian. Let me just start by saying the timing of this meeting is great, and to thank the people on this call, many of whom have been involved in so much of what's happened over the past year, as Ian has said. The timing is great because the prospect of having data at the very heart of government reform is real, and there's passion for it. And so getting our position and thoughts clear about that, I think, is going to be a way to really realize that opportunity we have in front of us. I want to just go back and reflect a little bit on the pandemic. And at the beginning, we were hampered enormously by lack of data, poor quality data, little ability to integrate data. And it meant we had much less situational awareness than we needed. And there is a note in one of the SAGE minutes from, I think, February time in 2020, saying we really do need to make sure we've got real-time, high-quality data. And that's obvious, but actually it was not possible to do that at the time. Several things happened over the course of the pandemic, which means that we are now in an extraordinarily good position in terms of data. Early on, the ONS study, to pick up Ian's point about surveys and studies, was put in place to generate the information that was required and has become an absolute bedrock of decision making. The NHS completely upped its game in terms of being able to provide data. It was really difficult at the beginning to get the data out of individual trusts to understand what was happening. It was recorded differently. It wasn't coming through into central positions. That's totally different now. And the formation of the Joint Biosecurity Centre, which I think is an interesting model to reflect on where we have other problems that require regular data information, intergovernment and data visualization, has been a revelation in terms of its ability to provide high quality information in near real time in a way that's accessible to decision makers. It's developed good data visualization tools. It's developed the ability to integrate health and non-health data, the things that Ian was talking about. It's coped with the challenge of an enormous data flow that occurs when you include things like genomics into the whole picture. So I think in JBC, we've got a model that I'll come back to a bit later. And then the fourth example I bring is the National Core Studies, which brought together a whole range of areas that we needed information on for policy input and decisions. And there, one of the streams of the 7 streams was data, to try to make sure that we got proper access and integration. And that's worked incredibly well for feeding not only government, but academia. So what are the issues that I would pull out from this as things that we need to think about? And I've got 7 things here, which are areas which are obvious, but nonetheless ones that I think we need to think about as we look at this question of data. The first is data generation. And this really speaks to the point that there are many cases where we simply don't know, and therefore we need to start a study or start a survey. So there's a question about where we lack the data itself, data generation. The second is around data collection and access. Very often in the pandemic, we weren't collecting the data and we certainly couldn't access it. The third is data flows, to make sure that we know where those data can flow. And to the fourth point, that needs to link to data integration and data linkage. That's all very well, but if you don't have the analytical capability, then you won't get that right. So the fifth point is analytical capability, and I've given the example of JBC. And the sixth point relating to that is informational presentation. This is not something that is only relevant to data people. It needs to be how you present this. And one of the striking examples during the pandemic is politicians, ministers and others who haven't been used to looking at data have been looking at it once or twice a day or more and having to make decisions based on data. That has changed a mindset, much in the way, and many of you will have seen this, that Kofi Annan's mind was changed with data visualization tools. And he wrote a rather wonderful piece on this in Nature about 2 years before he died, on the importance of data visualization to make him conceive problems in Africa in a totally different way. And then my final point, which relates to that, is all of this only works if you have customer awareness, and I'm defining customers here quite broadly in terms of civil service, ministers, and indeed the public, usability, and the ability for the customers to be able to articulate the questions that they would like addressed, because that way we get the two-way flow going between what we're building and what is actually required. So what has the pandemic actually shown us as a core part of this? Well, it's shown us that we can do this. It's shown us that it is possible to get data linkage. It is possible to get data flows. It is possible to get them integrated. It's possible to have good data visualization. It's possible to have ministers using this. And I think we mustn't lose that. So when we next say, well, it's not possible, it's too difficult, we've got to get permissions, data owners won't give it up, whatever the problems are, we've done it. It's been done, and therefore it can be done again. So where else might we want to use this? Well, the simple answer, and in a way, you know, Ian gave a list of these, is everywhere. But I want to be a little bit more specific than everywhere. There's no doubt in my mind that if you take, and I'm going to just for example, take the top 10 risks on the National Risk Register, we need to know for those top 10 risks, all of the things that I've said. Who owns the data? Where is it? What do you want to collect? How's it going to flow? How's it going to integrate? How are you going to look at it? So that's an obvious place to go. And then there are some big cross-Whitehall knotty problems where this has to be the way we think about them. It's the only way we can think about them when we're dealing with whole systems problem. And the obvious shining example of this is net zero, where if we don't apply this appropriately to net zero, we will not achieve our goal of net zero. So there's an imperative every bit as big and urgent as the pandemic, and we should set ourselves the task of making that work. But there are others as well. And you can pick, for example, I was talking to Henry Dimbleby about the upcoming food strategy, and you've got exactly the same problem there of integrating departments, integrating information across health, land, agriculture, food systems, biotechnology. And there again, there are things that would allow us to look at that and understand what needs to happen in a total systems approach. So I think there are many examples that we could pick off, and we should do exactly what's happened during the pandemic, which is pick off specific examples, solve them, and in doing so, we will also build the generic infrastructure, skills, capability, and know-how required to do this systematically across the whole of government. I will stop there.
Brilliant. Thank you both so much for that. We've got about 8 minutes left. So if you're okay, I'm going to move to some Q&A. I'm going to start with an easy one. Can you both talk about what has been your highlight of data sharing over the past year? I'm going to start with Patrick.
Well, the highlight of data sharing, frankly, has been to my mind, JBC. I mean, it's been because it's where it's all come together, and the ability to integrate health, non-health data and look at it and understand it. And I've looked at it on an absolutely daily basis, often many more times than once a day. It's changed the ability to manage this pandemic.
I'll just give two very quick ones. The first on a broad data sharing has been, I think, the Cabinet Office dashboard. I mean, I love dashboards at the best of times, but I think this is a really brilliant example of one that brings data from all kinds of places and enables it to be understandable very quickly. And the second, I mean, I can't remember being as excited as I have for a long time when we were able to link our infection survey data with vaccination data and really be able properly to be able to understand both vaccine hesitancy and vaccine efficacy and to see that there was a really good chance that the link between the vaccines and preventing illness was going to be quite high. I mean, that was fantastic.
Great, thank you. Now, a slightly more trickier one, and it's, I think, quite relevant to those of us who've been labouring in the data mines for a number of years. All these great advances over the last 18 months have been great, but they've been kind of sort of known as feasible for a long time. So why do you think it took a pandemic to make these changes?
Don't know, I don't know the answer to that, but it's an incredibly important question. And if you look at the advances that have been made in the NHS in both digitalization and data flow, they're exactly what people have been saying needs to happen probably for 2 decades, actually. And very often the answer was that it can't be done for reasons X, Y, and Z. Well, it's happened in an 18-month period. And so it tells us that in other situations, the same must be true. These things are possible. It's a matter of focus, mission, determination, pull, alignment. I'm afraid these are organizational, human, societal factors which need to come into play. So we shouldn't underestimate them. But that's why I say that in a way, the single key lesson out of all of this is it is totally possible to do it. It's just not easy, and there's nothing like a crisis to make it happen.
And I think I completely agree with everything that's said. So let me just build on that and just add, I think too often, right across different sectors, so I'm not just talking about the public sector here, there's been a kind of, almost a kind of, these data are my data. And if I share my data with somebody else, then A, that might bring risk to me in terms of privacy, or B, I might give them an advantage. And what I think we've seen in the last year is real leadership around data and data sharing, and we've seen a real can-do attitude for people to work together. And some of the timings that people would normally have said, oh, it'll take you 6 months to get a survey, we've done it in a week. And I think that has proven what can be done. And that's when I say no going back. We can't go back and say, oh, we've now got 6 months to do something. Actually, we've got 2 weeks.
Great. And I think, thinking about particularly the ONS's work, it has had a spectacularly good pandemic in terms of, speaking as kind of one of the big consumers of, in particular, business surveys, having that regular drumbeat of data telling us how things are going has been just really important. And I think that perhaps brings on to the final question that I'll pose, which is around risks, really. So there is a question here about pitfalls when we're starting to use new data flows to inform policy. Is there ever a risk that you make decisions on the data you see, but they haven't properly been integrated into the whole picture? How do you manage essentially the novelty risk from new and novel data sources in decision making?
I think it's a really good question, kind of, Patrick. It's a really super important question, but you need to be looking very carefully at what the comparison is between your new data and the old data, and there's no actual excuse for not getting down and doing some serious hard-nosed, well, what differences should we expect? And one of the problems that I think we do have sometimes is that we say that what we've been doing for 20 years must be right. Well, actually, if what we've been doing for 20 years had an inherent bias in it, we might be solving that bias. So I think it is incredibly important really to compare, but to understand very clearly the characteristics, and that's where, if you like, the metadata becomes so important, the characteristics of what the new data are and what biases or lack of, what biases you might solve, or what biases you might bring. But I think it's incredibly important that we do not say, oh, well, it looks a bit different, therefore let's not do it.
Yeah, just to build on that, I mean, there's a great tendency to view something you've currently got as the gold standard. And the truth is, it's not the gold standard, it's just your current standard. And as Ian says, your new data set may be looking at something which is actually better, but the tendency is always to compare it and say, because it's different, it's not matching the gold standard. That's what we've got to be wary of. And then there are two other things that I'd say. The first is, in all of this, I think the interpretation of this needs to be done with humility. And the second is that uncertainty is a key thing to understand. So defining the uncertainty around the data projections and the lessons that you think you're drawing from it, being able to articulate that, I think, is a key function of the data scientists and so on involved in this.
100% agree. Can I just add one final thing, Mike? And that's to say, I know Grant's going to be speaking soon at this symposium about some of the faster economic indicators. And I think it's really important to recognize these are incredibly accurate, but we need to be clear exactly what they are measuring and to use them on the basis of that. You know, so they're not GDP, but they are measuring things which are incredibly important and they are accurate. And we just need, though, to build in measures of uncertainty where that's appropriate.
That's great. Thank you both so much for your time this morning. I mean, it's a really inspirational start for the rest of the day. And I just want to think perhaps the main message I take away from the opening session is around, you know, there have been massive gains made. We've got to consolidate them, but we need to kick on with it, don't we? So thank you both very much. And I'm now going to hand over to the king of BIES data science, Luke Pereira, who's going to chair the next session. But thank you.
Thank you.